For anyone who is new to our series of webinars, I'm Elizabeth. I'm the Interim Chief Executive here at the Digital Poverty Alliance. If you are new to the DPA community, welcome. Really great to have everybody here today. The Digital Poverty Alliance is a charitable coalition, and we bring together industry, we bring together government, and we bring together the third sector with our aim of ending digital poverty once and for all by 2030. And a big part of that is talking about the issues of digital inclusion, but then moreover looking at where we can find best practice, where we can find solutions, and how we can help others to be able to integrate some of that into their practice. So I'm really excited actually today that we've got Rich Byrne, who is the Digital Skills Partnership Manager for DSIT and also for the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, talking about embracing the digital human. Rich, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm based here actually in East Dorset. Where are you, Elizabeth, actually? I forgot to ask that.
I am in North Kent.
North Kent.
A little bit away, but not too far.
Not too far, not too far. So yes, my name is Rich Byrne, and yeah, I'm Digital Skills Partnership Manager. I'm based in East Dorset, but I cover mainly the Solent region in what I'm doing at the moment. Part of my role is also to cover the Southeast. We'll probably get onto that in some of the discussions we have about the challenges that I faced in covering the whole Southeast area, and sort of fine-tuning what I do to the Solent region. Just so you know, so people understand what the Digital Skills Partnership is. So essentially, it's around 6 or 7 years ago, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which included digital at the time, which has now switched over to Department for Science, Innovation and Tech, set up as a new policy the Digital Skills Partnership, or local digital skills partnerships. And so there are 8 dotted across the whole of the UK. I am the newest member from January this year. And my role is slightly different in what I've just touched on, in the sense that I've covered the whole Southeast region. So multiple different regions, 7 in total, actually. Sorry, 6 in total. So that's slightly different to what they've done in the past, but it was a bit of a pilot to see if there could be some cross-pollination, multiple regional activity that could help. Essentially, the whole point of this and why I do what I do is to raise the agenda of the digital skills gap, which I'm sure many of you know is a huge challenge, but there is some awesome work happening, with which I'll share some of that with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rich. If you are sitting watching this live, please do put in the chat who you are, what organisation you represent, and whereabouts in the country you are. We love to see the chat kicking off as the webinar goes through. You'll also see at the bottom of the video screen a Q&A button. If you've got questions as we're going along, please do put those into that Q&A function, and then we will come to as many of those at the end of the webinar as we can. I think just to sort of kick off, Rich, to what extent do you feel that there's a shared vision across all of the delivery partners to improve digital capability and capacity across your region? What sort of steps have you taken to tackle digital exclusion?
Yeah, so the reality actually, Elizabeth, and I don't want to start this on negative, it's going to sound a bit of a negative actually, but it's not intended to be, is that actually it's a huge challenge across multiple regions. A lot of sort of digital capability projects, digital inclusion, digital exclusion projects sit often with local authorities. There aren't many other entities other than charitable organisations who do a lot of great work in regions such as yourself. So the key challenge, essentially, and someone in my role trying to look at all these different regions, is that they do have different priorities. They can all agree, actually, that, for instance, digital inclusion is something that needs more work. And in kind of propositioning, I guess, the future of my role, when I did a kind of 3 to 6 months mapping when I first started, digital inclusion was always coming up by all the organizations, local authorities, local enterprise partnerships I was talking to, that they wanted to do more. And actually, the reality was they didn't have a lot of resource to be able to do more. So in answer to your question, Elizabeth, I think there is a big challenge across all regions and a desire to do a lot more work, but the resource, as we all know, with a lot of local projects and local funding of those projects, funding is a lot lower this year than it has been for many a year. So it's about those regions having to prioritize. And I think digital inclusion, if we specifically talk about that, is up there and is a desire to want to do more, but the realities are what they can do is limited. So I guess what I then did in my role is realize there's this opportunity there, I guess, to try and support some of that work. And I mean, one of the main things that I've tried to do is actually communicate out what is going on, because actually, this is someone who comes from a marketing background. What I've realized, there's an opportunity for better communications out there. Often when projects happen in regions that are specifically given a budget to do something, to specifically focus on a particular subject, the marketing budgets, especially when they come from local government, are very, very small. So I guess I've put my marketing hat on when I've come into this role and thought about how we can communicate out what is already happening, not try and do something brand new, not come and go, oh, I've got loads of great ideas. Let's do this. Let's start this from scratch. It's actually mapping those regions, finding out what's going on and trying to amplify that voice. And I think the more of that can happen across all regions and the more unified, it's a bit like today, is bringing some voices together who've got the same thoughts, objectives. The more of that can happen, the more people will realize the challenges that are out there and then can begin to do something about it.
And absolutely something that we see is, one, raising the awareness of digital inclusion as an absolutely essential priority. Is a lot of the time that we spend is thinking about how can we best do that. But absolutely that signposting piece is incredibly important. I think there's a stat around 2/3 of adults who wish to improve their digital skills would do so if only there was free support out there. Well, there is free support out there, but we often, as a sector, we're not getting that message to the people who most need that. And I think that's endlessly one of the challenges. I don't know whether you've sort of seen that there's a difficulty in getting that out to new groups of people who perhaps they're not online, they're not going into libraries, for example, and we're not quite getting it to the place where they need that support.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to say, Elizabeth, I think the key to this communications piece is people, those advocates who can talk about it. And that moves us away sometimes from the digital world. I think there is an automatic strategy put in place that when we're going to push out content, invite people to events, even if they are physical events, we use digital platforms to do all of that these days for lots of different reasons. It's efficient. Quite often that might be led by a marketing team who, they're very much in the digital world to a certain degree, far more so than many other departments in organizations. But it's those individuals, those local people who can kind of knowledge transfer, who know this information, know where it is, and can handhold a little bit. I think we're seeing less of it. We all know in organizations and businesses, people are an expensive part of a business. And so I don't think enough emphasis is put on those sorts of people to be in roles to help signpost, to help hold hands and show people, show and tell, where things are, where those locations are, what they need to do when they get there, what they need to click on, what password they need to remember. It's those little details which are big blockers to people utilizing more digital and technology platforms on a regular basis, amongst many other challenges, of course. But yeah, I believe people are a really important part of all this.
Definitely. And of course, what we're here to talk about today is embracing the digital human. What does that term mean? How does it relate to IT and digital learning experiences?
So I'm going to confess, Elizabeth, something here. I stole the term from BBC Radio 4 program that's been, I think it's Radio 4 or it might be Radio 2, that's actually been going on for quite a few years, which is basically talking about this linking of technology, digital, and us as humans. What I've then done is it sort of utilized, I guess, my own experiences in sort of marketing world, corporate world, in running a small business, and sort of merged what I see as some of the challenges that don't get talked about actually that much, which is this digital human concept. But it's basically looking at us as individuals, and in its basic sense, how do we feel about digital and technology? Do we love it? Do we absolutely fear it? There's a famous American psychiatrist, actually, Kubler-Ross, who actually, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talks about this love and fear. There's only two emotions in the world, love and fear. And I think that can be applied to tech. You either love it and you embrace it. You're a first mover. When the latest Apple iPhone comes out, you are on it and you know everything about it. Or you're someone who fears it. Ugh, it's something new. It's technical. Don't really understand it. It scares me. And I think those are the sort of human factors that we need to consider a bit more. I know why they don't get considered so much, because they're very hard to measure. How do you measure love and fear? You can't really. It's a very difficult thing. But also incorporated into this is ideas such as trust with digital technology, confidence in using it, adaptability. You know, recent events. I won't say the C word. No, not that C word. The other C word ends in vid. That taught us a lot about how we adapt using technology. We're using a vessel now in using Zoom to run this webinar, of which before COVID period, many of us weren't using, but we had to adapt. We were forced to adapt, actually, a lot of us, certainly in the working world, or if you were a student at university, it was thrust upon you. But adaptability, I think, if you look at that as a skill set, for me, that's a massive one that we can look at in how we could perhaps measure that and look at how adaptable we are as people. And in the context of digital technology, it is going to be forever changing. I just need to mention two letters to you, which, again, strikes love and fear in a lot of people. The letters A and I. That's a good example of the love and fear element. Some people love that. They love all that it can be and will be and can enable us. And there's also many who fear what it is doing, what it's doing to the skills world, what it's doing to jobs. But if we can focus not on those elements, but on us as humans and what we can control, make ourselves more adaptable, learn to be a bit more trusting, or not in some cases, build our confidence using these tools. Because I fully believe, and this is to go back to this point, what is the digital human? We can adapt as much as we want to. There are limitations on that. But if we can focus on those skill sets, the technology will constantly change. So let's not focus on that element. Let's look within ourselves, excuse me, and how we can make small tweaks that can help ourselves, and therefore then help the organizations that we're in, the colleges, the universities that we're in, to sort of embrace that, I guess.
And that's incredibly important, because there's often conversations about people's motivation to get online. If you move past affordability, actually, do people want to be online? Do people want to learn digital skills? What's the driver? What are people's concerns? Online safety, scams, phishing attacks, all of this. And it feels like actually there's a bit of a sliding scale and a spectrum. And actually it also ties into what tools people are using. People often feel very safe actually using some forms of social media where they're connecting with local people that they feel that they can trust. But then those can be exactly the same platforms where actually a lot of the perceived dangers may be hiding as well. Sort of tying into that, what do you think are the key elements that kind of distinguish a really positive and engaging digital experience that probably builds on that trust and that confidence from one that actually just feels impersonal, disconnected, and actually probably a bit off-putting?
Sure. I mean, what I just say, Liz, just in those points I'm making about sort of adaptability and trust. A couple of things just to mention that if you wanted to look a bit further into this, those that are listening, there's a bit on the trust element. There's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which does talk about social media and the media. If you're a bit more interested in that, and it's done a mapping of 23 countries, 30,000 people who sort of signed up to give their thoughts. It's worth looking into that from a trust perspective. And also on an adaptability perspective, there's a great organization they're based in Dorset, actually, run by a guy called Ross Thornley, who produced a book on decoding AQ, which is an adaptability quotient, which taps on things like emotional intelligence as well. Really interesting concept. These guys are doing work all across the world about trying to make people more adaptable. So although I'm talking about these things being quite hard to measure, there are some great things that are happening out there where people are monitoring and tracking these things. So could these be extra measurements that are put alongside the other things we measure? But to your point, and to your next question, looking at digital experiences, ones that feel sort of impersonal and disconnected. So I'm looking at this through a lens, probably when we look at websites, because we can all kind of understand that, right? I think probably everyone here has probably been on a website, but there are many, as we know, and why the DPA exists, because there are many that don't surf on the web at all. But let's look at a website. I mean, for me, and I've been involved in various different projects in my marketing days, and also running digital adoption projects for growth hubs, and working a lot with user experience companies, which fascinate me. UX, you may have heard it, but user experience, looking at how individuals sort of navigate websites. I find it fascinating because, again, the marketer in me looks at, why do people do stuff? Why do they buy? Why is bread at one end of the supermarket and milk at the other end? That was what always fascinated me about marketing. But let's go back to the websites. I mean, gone are the days, I believe, of just building pages. There'll be people in this forum who are involved in perhaps website development or might be on a marketing team, and you need content, right? You need content to fill those pages, the About Us page, the Who Are We page, the What's Our Key Products page. But I think what we should look at, and this does happen a lot, and there's some great examples that are out there of organizations doing this, is instead of building websites, we should think of them as learning environments. And that, I don't think that matters who you are, whether you're a consumer brand. It is very relevant for B2B brands, business to business brands, but also in the consumer world. And so those websites, I think, need to encourage sharing of content, learning content, encourage actions, encourage people to do something, a call to action. So when they're on that page, get them to do something, get them to interact, and encourage a change in someone. I think that's what we should be striving for, because we're all probably saturated with web links, signposted to click on various things for more information. But I think if you introduce the dawn of AI in this, I think we're getting to a point where that's too much for people these days. Just take me somewhere, give me the information I need that might help me move forward in what I'm trying to achieve. Don't give me all of the extra stuff in there that I don't really want. Make it bespoke for me, or make it tailored for me as well. So I think it's that value exchange there that needs to be considered more. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of organizations out there who are doing this really, really well. But I think if it's about trying to make things a bit more personal and a bit more connected, try and understand your audience more, study a bit more, I guess, on kind of marketing. What do those people want? What do they want from us? And how can we help them? Let's not try and sell to them. Let's try and help them as much as possible. Because essentially that's what people want, is they want to solve something. They've got an issue or they've got a problem, and let's try and help them solve it a bit more. So I guess I'm going into a bit of marketing here, Elizabeth, to be honest, but I think it's really important because it's about the whys, isn't it, sometimes?
It is, and I have long long said that the problem with a lot of websites is that actually, whether it's a person or an organization, you've got a lot of things you want to tell a lot of people. But unfortunately, the people who are actually using the website don't necessarily want to be told all of those things. They want to know the thing that they want to know. But I guess where this then starts to become again sort of complex but interesting is you get into personalization, you get into cookies, you get into algorithms, you get into AI. And actually, particularly from a digital poverty perspective, people using these services for the first time, how do we balance what's genuinely useful to them with sort of the data harvesting and them having that strong understanding actually of how that data is being used, what data is being used, what are they giving away? I don't know whether that's something that you consider in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think just a sort of a side thought on that. And so I'm involved in a marketing-based kind of community group called You Are the Media, which is national. I did start out in Dorset, but it's sort of spread across the whole of the UK, which its sort of purpose is about you being the media, not using platforms all the time, such as Facebook and your Instagrams, who change their algorithms and all this on a regular basis, and you are beholden to them. It's about you creating a space that tells your story, essentially, selling your service or product, but telling it from your perspective and you controlling that with content. And then, there's some great people who are in that community. But I think what we always kind of focus on is just those narratives that you can control, but niching down your audiences. So not being afraid to not talk to 100% of people, being okay talking to those 20% first. Start with those first 20 who really connect on the same level, have mutual understanding, and work with them. It's not about the tens of thousands of customers and tens of thousands of likes. Start things very, very small and then progress and develop and grow them from there. And that means you can be more selective, you can be more niched down, you can communicate, because essentially you're going to be talking more directly with a clearer narrative to people who want to be a part of whatever you're doing, rather than trying to force a lot of people to understand what you're trying to talk about. So I think that sort of being small and starting small is okay. And it will help with your conversations. It will help with those conversions if this is about getting customers. Or it will just help with building that community, because you start it small and with a belief system and with your own voice that connects with people.
And the internet has incredible power to bring people together, and people of very differing needs, very differing backgrounds. How do you feel that the digital human concept sort of enhances accessibility and inclusivity within technology and digital to make sure that everyone can actually benefit from what's happening out?
Well, I think the idea that I set out with was to take it away from all of the transitions and changes and developments on a daily basis that technology and digital goes through. I see so many people enter more into that fear space rather than the love space because it gets overwhelming. And I think actually we can't really control those developments of technology and digital, because they're just going to keep going at a pace that's just going to get faster and faster, I believe. But I think anyone, I mean, you, Elizabeth, myself, anyone listening today, we all have an experience with digital and technology. We've all got stories there. We've all got an engagement with it, whether we sometimes realize it or not, or are conscious of it. So the digital human is more about us looking at things that we can control. So go back to some of the points I mentioned about building confidence, motivation, looking at how you trust or don't trust certain, technologies or digital platforms. And I believe that's where that digital human bit comes in and can resonate for years to come and keep going, because we're always focusing on the individual, and then technology and digital is a part of that, but we become better associated with it because we learn more about how we can engage with it or not engage with it. Just to highlight a bit of a point on that. So part of our steering group, Digital Skills Partnership, we have a lady called Carolyn Freeman, who's a cyber psychologist. And she talks a lot about control, us learning better to control how we use digital and technology in our lives, work lives, social lives. And again, that's maybe something we should be factoring in. And she's actually been an influence in this digital human kind of concept. Is learning it's okay to put that phone down. It's okay to not answer that email. It's okay to not understand how to use Excel, despite the fact that all of your colleagues do use it and use it to the nth degree. And I think off the back of that, it's about then creating environments and learning environments where it's okay to raise your hand and say, I haven't got a clue how to use Excel. I know I should. Everyone else is using it, but I really don't know. And I put that in the same category, Elizabeth, actually, as the sort of the mental health conversations. You go back 5-10 years, those conversations weren't happening. But we've created spaces now where it's okay to talk about those things, which is amazing. And I think you can put sort of digital and technology in that same category. It's okay to be saying, I don't understand these things. I don't get what AI is. What's the point of it? But you can only say those things in your environments. They're okay for you to say that. So there's another thought there, I guess, about creating spaces and learning environments and honesty coming out and people saying, I don't get it. I have a fear of it. Actually, I love it. Actually, it confuses me every single day. Or I'm somewhere in the middle.
And I guess it's interesting as well how people sort of tackle those conversations in different ways, because yes, often in the workplace, people don't feel able to say, I have no idea how to use this new service, even though actually it was new a year ago, but I still haven't quite, got a grip on it. Versus on the other hand, it does seem that tech can almost be a bit like people don't feel embarrassed to say, oh, I'm not very good at maths, even though actually everybody should have the opportunity to really enhance their math skills. It's a crucial skill in life. But tech is almost sort of falling into that box of you can almost just say, no, I'm no good with anything digital, and expect people to leave you alone, rather than actually, no, you should be supported to be able to access that service, use that facility, go and enjoy the latest new thing, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever else may be around the corner.
Actually, Elizabeth, just to highlight a point there. So a lady called Liz Williams, who runs Future.now, was at Westminster probably about 6 months ago now. She was putting out a load of snippets of the interview she was having at Westminster, which was sort of broadcast. And I loved her point, actually, that she made on this subject about the learning of digital from an early age. And don't quote me on this, but she essentially said, look, every other subject that's taught at school, we don't just say to kids, well, the subject matter's there, pick up a book and you'll learn it. We guide them, we handhold. This goes back to those advocates I'm kind of talking about. But when it comes to digital and technology, I think Liz's point was about the culture we have is like, well, it's there, so you should know it. There's a phone, there's a laptop, there's a computer, but it doesn't get taught in those same ways, right? With people hand-holding, advocates, guiding, part of the curriculum. I know that's a big issue, isn't it, in terms of where it sits in the curriculum. But I think that's a really good point, is that it's just looked at very differently, isn't it? And we're expected to understand it. And then we sort of kid ourselves, or, imposter syndrome certainly in the work environment, going, oh, I should pretend I do understand what this is all about and what that button on Excel does. But we often don't. So I think the more environments we create and we can be open and honest, and really important as well, is in having maybe peer learning as well going on. It goes back to the love and fear people. Those lovers, make them your advocates. They'll love it. They'll enjoy it. And then those that fear it, it's okay to put your hand up, go, don't get it, but please, if you can show me, or I can take some of your passion that you've got and find a love for it. And I do believe, from my personal perspective, the more love we can find in digital and technology, I think our futures are going to be slightly easier. I'm not saying everyone should use technology all the time. I know there are a lot of times where they shouldn't, and it can be a distraction. I know that's certainly in the business world. When helping small businesses with the digital projects I've done over the years, digital sometimes is positioned as the oracle to resolving everything, more sales, better productivity, but it's often not. And it's a distraction that doesn't get attached to business objectives enough. It's important. I believe personally, it's a really important part. And the more we can embrace it, the better. But it's learning those personal skills and those human skills, developing those more so that we can better embrace it.
Absolutely. And I think looking down some of the people who are on this webinar today, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in how could their organization start to foster that kind of culture where you're putting people actually at the heart of what they're doing, heart of, their work, what they're doing. Do you have any sort of best practice or strategies that you would recommend on how to begin that?
I think this goes to the advocacy perspective and or champions, the lovers. Use them as catalysts. Use the humans as the catalyst to drive some of that change, or drive some of that encouragement, to drive some of that love, if we want to call it that. And this is always, again, it goes back to my point making that feelings is a big part of this, but it's often a part that gets forgotten in the workplace, but increasingly so how people feel about stuff. I think we can no longer just choose to ignore that in the workplace. We can't let it override a lot of things, because we sometimes have to put it aside to get things done. But if you take those advocates, take the lovers, and use them to help drive. So it may be a significant change that's needed within the business, because, maybe you're going from a server to the cloud, for instance. So it's a change initiative that has to happen. My advice there would be, well, don't let the technical people lead on that. Let the people who love the thought of the change and what it can enable them do lead on it. Because quite often we see technical leaders, IT, and no disrespect to them, because I love those sorts of people, because of what they can do is incredible, and I don't have that capability. But the language used, for instance, will be very complicated often. It won't connect with people who aren't that au fait with understanding IT. So, I think language needs to be considered. And let those people who are passionate about what the change can be and why it needs to happen drive the conversation, so people are constantly reminded of the why. Not this has to change because technically we need to do X, Y to keep up with GDPR and to blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to add into this mix now, another thing is language is an important part. But advocacy and the language you use internally and externally is really important. To touch on that, and just examples maybe people want to have a look at. So I've been writing a Digital Lives content series, which essentially is a newsletter. I don't like calling it a newsletter because I think that sounds a bit dull, but it is. And it's on LinkedIn. But I've tried to use language in that is very easy on the eye, so to speak, easy to comprehend, and not too technical. Because again, that's a barrier that I've seen, is language used is often very confusing, gets too technical, and then that's where you get people switching off a lot of the time. So maybe we can share at the end, Elizabeth, if we can, a link or something, and people can have a look at that. And I just cover the kind of Southeast region, and I try and comment, always with a call to action as well, for people to be able to do something, to activate something, to learn something, all around kind of how our lives are tied to tech and what that means for us as individuals.
And that language point is really important, because one of the things that I say a lot, and probably too much, so people will have heard me say this before, but no one wakes up one morning and goes, today I want to learn digital. Yet we talk so much about digital skills. How do we grow digital skills? How do we make people feel confident with digital? And actually, we need to find another way of expressing this, because people use digital as a facilitator. They don't use it as an end within itself. But it does seem to be a challenge finding that synonym that conveys what we're trying to do, but isn't just purely linked to, you need to learn digital today.
No, I agree. I think it's more around, if we can focus on the outcomes, what does it enable us to do? I mean, I again, someone who's been in the sort of SME support world with digital adoption, I was almost getting to the point where I was sick of talking about it because of, well, I've already touched on the distraction it can cause, but also people's association with it. If we've got everyone in the room today to write a sentence on what they thought digital meant, we would have so many varying versions of that. And, that's okay, because it does mean something different to everyone. But in that very nature, it goes back to the point we're making about kind of digital and tech evolving, and it always meaning something different all the time. But us as individuals, we are also evolving and changing. But those kind of skills that I've touched on, the confidence, the trust, again, that's something that we can control and focus on and forever try to develop, no matter what technology does to us in the future. And I must admit, I am a lover, but there's times I dip into the fear. But
Yes,
mainly,
and it comes back to that sort of spectrum idea that actually you might love some bits of technology and absolutely hate other bits.
when
You,
it goes wrong, I think we can all agree on, Elizabeth, when it doesn't work.
yes,
When you're
one
trying
day
to be on a live webinar and it won't connect.
one day this laptop will go out of the window. Not today though. So one thing that you did touch on earlier was the fact that actually to reach people, especially those who are living in digital poverty, we often need to take things actually offline. However, in terms of addressing digital exclusion, what role do you see in technology actually supporting that? So not just taking things offline to reach people, but tech playing that active role in ensuring that digital learning, digital interfaces, digital services can actually be accessible to everyone, regardless of their background, their circumstances, affordability.
Yeah, I think this concept comes in my head in regards to this subject matter is sort of faces in places. Is it still the human element always there? And my point on that is that most websites we go onto these days, you sometimes have no idea who's behind them. And I think that's a real bad decision made by whoever's built that content on that site, because I personally, I always want to know who are the people behind it. So in answer to your question, is that I think there's a dual perspective there to be looking at, is that providing simplistic, easily accessible tools and resources. And again, I'm driving that agenda of everything having a purpose and to help and to do something rather than just information overload. But it has to be in places that sometimes we might not even realize. So to access that link or that resources page, where can we access? So for those that don't have internet at home, and I'm sure Elizabeth and her team can give way more data in terms of that amount of people who still don't have access to some of those basic things. It's actually quite alarming, to be honest. But is linking open opportunities in places. So I know libraries do a lot of good work in regards to making training, hand-holding to a certain degree, and access possible to online resources. But maybe thinking about other spaces in which that can be done, learning centres of any sort. If there is a space to be used that a local authority might run, that a small local organisation who wants to help develop skills in the local region, it's just providing spaces with people in there. And it's not about people being experts in digital and technology to train people, just providing open environments and having a data set, I guess, or a knowledge bank themselves of easily accessible, useful resources. I mean, that's something I know many organizations like yourself, Elizabeth, and other organizations doing great work across the country. It's often the thing that comes about is there's so much resource out there. There's so much available, but where do we put it in a really convenient place so people can access it? Ideally, we'd have one place, I think, this one hub, national hub, where all of this sits. And you can freely glide through this digital space, guided by an online tutor if you need them to help you do so. But I don't think we'll ever get away from it's difficult to enable access for not just reasons of accessibility. There's connectivity issues that still exist in many rural places, for instance, across the country. And there are, your big corporates, the likes of Vodafone, EE, are doing some great work across the country to improve that. But there are some things, again, that we can't control in that respect, but we can drive the agenda and the issue. And hopefully there'll be some people today who didn't quite know the big challenges that there are with digital poverty, and we'll learn a bit more about that and may have some ideas, that can help fuel that connection with digital content, but also people as well. Yeah, I think that answers the question, Elizabeth. I may have gone a bit off track there.
I think it does. And I mean, it's sort of in terms of that point around, the scale of the issue, we look to various data sets that are out there. So for example, Lloyds Bank data shows that there's somewhere between 10 million and 11 million people in this country who, if we rocked up today and gave them a free laptop and dropped it off on their doorstep and walked off, actually they wouldn't have the digital skills to know how to turn that on, how to find the internet, how to fill in a form on there. And that's a massive number of people. Again, between about 20 and 25% of children don't have access to a laptop or a suitable device for learning, but homework is all getting set online. And we talk to teenagers, went to a school recently, who are trying to do their coursework on a secondhand mobile phone, and you go, this is not a way for people to be learning. This is not something that's going to produce confident digital citizens of the future. So it's a massive issue, and it's actually a very complex issue because it does draw together devices, connectivity, but also support, skills, motivation, confidence, trust. It's massive to unravel, but every step that we can take is another great stage in kind of combating digital poverty in this country.
Yeah, just to touch on that, just finish that point as well. I think there's this thought I've had in my head about this, the human interception in all of this, is that if we're building services, and increasingly so, delivering services online, click here, this is all the information that you need, slightly like a culture of, well, I sent you that email, or I sent you the link, therefore you should know everything because it's all there in that email, or it's all there, that click of a button. But if I go back, for instance, if I go back to my earlier days in work, when I used to send important emails, there was a culture in the organization where it was like, you'd then follow up that email with a quick call just to make sure the person understood it, got it. We all good? Did you get it? Fine, cool, just double checking. Like I feel that sort of human inception needs to come back in play, so that there's this huge assumption because stuff has been sent or it's available online, you should know everything. It goes back to Liz Williams' point about, from Future.now about, well, because it's there, you should know it. But we don't. We really don't often, and we haven't read it, and we haven't seen the link, and we haven't clicked through, and we haven't read the 33-page document that's attached. But we all go, well, it was sent to you, so you should know it. I think we need human intervention, and maybe in these service designs, we have that built in. I know there's lots of reasons why, and we've touched on things like cost of people in organizations, a very expensive thing, but maybe it's something that needs to be thought about. And that might touch on things like company culture, for instance, that need to be considered. But have this hybrid collaboration, I think, with people in technology, and don't forget that. And I love the efficiencies that technology can give us, but I don't like things like that where it's just there's a big assumption made that because it is there and it is available, therefore you will know it and understand it.
Yes, and I think actually this sort of starts to come into some of the questions that we're seeing, because it is that link between actually what can technology do, but actually where do you still need people, where you just need to be able to ask someone a question. So one of the people here today has asked, when looking at websites for entire populations, particularly sort of maybe from a local authority perspective, how do you begin to provide that balance to account for all the different kinds of users and the very different levels of digital literacy that they may have?
I mean, it's a tough one. I think this is something that certainly local authorities have been trying to crack for decades. I think a lot of them have probably got a lot better. And I'll go back to the kind of the study of UX, user experience, and understanding as much as you possibly can about your audience, who is going to be accessing that. And I don't think we'll ever fully understand exactly who's going to be clicking on our pages, but I think you have to the best of your knowledge, with best practice and doing a lot of research, is try and map all those potential individuals who may be accessing services and try to accommodate in the best way possible. And if you don't know how, is to listen, is to open up those communications and try and improve your services. Apply that iterative digital approach to product building. Constantly be checking in, is this right? Are we doing this right? Could we improve upon this? And make small changes. You can't just launch, for instance, like a local authority website. It would take months and months and months to develop if it's done right. It can't just happen overnight, but you can't wait for it to be the ultimate, because you'll never have a website built. It's that iterative approach and being open about that conversation and say, this is our starting point. We want to build it and improve it, but work with you to do so. Constantly give us that feedback so we can make it as open and accessible as possible. Many are very good at that, and local authorities really, I sometimes feel really sorry for them because they have to try and be everything to everyone a lot of the time, and that is, for me, marketing background is like my worst nightmare. Sometimes is you can't be everything to everyone in reality when you're a small, underfunded little team trying to develop an online platform for every single person in your region to use. It is a tough task, but I think open communication and being honest about it evolving and developing as time goes on, I think, is a good strategy.
And sort of moving on to thinking about actually how people get that feedback. So we've got a question that AI, of course, could be enabling the most disadvantaged in society to access all knowledge in the world, really, and share data. But those people are never consulted about the AI revolution, so their voice isn't heard in any of those. How can we get these people into that discussion in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think it's probably just trying to look at other ways. If you're thinking about gathering feedback and genuinely listening to people, not just sending out a link and saying, "Can you give us your thoughts?" and it never gets looked at. But it goes back to that human interception, doesn't it? That I was sort of suggesting, is trying to create environments where you can discuss and have open conversation. So physical meetings, events, that piggyback or marry alongside some of those digital services that you might run, is making sure you have a mix of both, I think. And if you feel there's a particularly underrepresented group, is maybe targeting them with physical interventions, events. Certainly if I think about events in the world that I've been in years, from a personal perspective, but also business perspective, think about how those events can be engaging in a way that isn't about just sort of, we've got a problem and we want your help to solve it. Think about what other things might make those people tick. I'd put it in the same category if you're going to create a content strategy for your business. Don't just focus on the thing that you sell. Focus on everything else that surrounds it, that interests people, the why almost. So maybe, an idea is, just different types of events that don't just focus on the problem, but try and capture an audience and be targeted to a particular audience if you feel they're underrepresented.
And incredibly key. We know that a lot of focus is starting to turn to actually reaching people who have lived experience of digital poverty and lived experience of the kind of intersectionality that sits around that. Yeah. And we have to get these people into these conversations, otherwise that divide is just going to get bigger and bigger.
And I would also say as well, Elizabeth, is don't just think that you are the only one to try and help and solve the problem. Whatever organization you're in, whether we're talking local authority or a business, partnering, I think, is a big undervalued thing. I'm part of a partnership. To drive a partnership with lots of entities involved is very difficult. However, if you can unify on some key top 3, top 5 things, you can leverage each other's resources. And also, if you think of this about reaching people, leverage audiences. So if a particular organization might have a database of 10,000 people that they regularly engage with, that audience might be a benefit to get your message out to them. And I'm not necessarily talking about selling stuff here. It might be just about a local authority driving a message home, trying to reach those underrepresented people. So another idea, instead of you hosting the event, look at ways you can piggyback other events, be involved with other things that are going on. Certainly from my experiences where I came into this role and thought, I'm going to change the world and have all these great ideas. Do you know what? Every region has 100 great ideas that are already happening that people just don't know about them. But if you can bring those ideas together and galvanize them together, there's way more strength in doing that for everyone involved, as long as you've got 3, 5, even one linking kind of objective that suits all of you involved.
Very true. We talk a lot about bringing people together, collaborating, not duplicating, and actually it's absolutely fundamental. One of our ambassadors, Paul Russell, wants to pick up on the digital human as a term, and he asks if in 20 years or so, will we still be using that, or will that actually be out of date because it's been so immersive for everyone? And he goes on to ask, are we using it today to create artificial categories to quantify the problem of digital poverty? Are we framing this unfairly because human life should be diverse and messy and complicated, even if a computer isn't involved?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't coin the phrase. I took a phrase that was already out there. But my perspective was to just focus on us as humans and how we can control, I guess, certain things about ourselves, and touched on your motivations, confidence, etc. But I do agree with you. I think the term digital should disappear from these conversations to a certain point, because it is about us as individuals now and in the future, and we're all going to be exponentially more digitized, whether we like it or not. It will happen. It's not going to reverse itself, I don't think. So yeah, I think the term, I think it should be talked about. We should be looking at a more holistic approach. Same way as that, a mentor to businesses on digital adoption is actually, let's not just focus on digital. Let's focus on the holisticness of the business and your objectives and where you're going as a person, where you want your business to go, and where you see it in 20 years' time. You're not going to suddenly say we are now a digital business and doing digital stuff. You're still the same business, but you're going to be using different tools to help you, to aid you, to advance you. And you're going to stop using certain tools actually that might be a distraction, or might be jeopardizing the quality of what you do. So yes, I think let's drop the digital term. We'll make that decision. So it's just going to be called the Poverty Alliance. I'm just going to be called the Skills Put No. Difficult one. We'll have these conversations a lot, Elizabeth. I'm sure you have a lot of it about leading with that term, because everyone sort of recognizes it, but no one recognizes it.
Yes. And in fact, looking in industry, people talk about tech businesses and they talk about businesses that use digital, and you go, well, no, every business uses digital. Yeah. Actually, name a business that doesn't have any digital element to it anywhere. No website, no online bookkeeping, absolutely nothing. You're going to have a very, very short list. But on the other hand, we still need this catch-all term that describes what it is that we're trying to get at. But it's imperfect. It's definitely imperfect. The next question is, given how vital the digital space is for every aspect of life, no prizes to anyone for guessing how I would answer this question, but given how vital the digital space is for every aspect of life, is there an argument for ensuring that everyone across the country has connectivity? And what are the ways we could achieve that?
Oh, I don't know if I have. Oh no, I've got an idea. Zeppelins.
Oh.
I don't know if anyone remembers. It was, I don't know if it still exists. Maybe someone could look this up and tell me otherwise. I think it was Facebook many, many years ago was sending in Zeppelins, so these big airships, hover above regions and bring connectivity to really out there regions that didn't have any connectivity whatsoever. And these sorts of things do exist. Whether they're in that shape or form now, I'm not too sure. But if I sort of go a bit, what could the future look like, and go a bit sort of Netflix, Black Mirror, in a more positive way than those Black Mirrors tend to go, if I'm honest. I think there are so many solutions that exist now that if there was the right political backing, every single political backing, funding, obviously being a key part, every region, every single person could have connectivity, I believe, because the technology is there. It's just for instance, here's a good example. I live in a rural location in Dorset. Okay, so I'm about 25 minutes from Bournemouth. We've only just managed to kind of get 3G connection out here, which is crazy, really. I'm lucky because I live behind a tower behind my house, which was bought by Vodafone about 20 years ago. So I actually have really good phone signal. But if you go within a mile that way, signal just drops out, phone signal. Yes, and trying to get fiber connection is almost nigh impossible. And that seems ludicrous, certainly in the role that I do, that I'm sat here in a rural location with sometimes really poor connectivity. I can't, for instance, upload barely anything. If I do, it takes a huge amount of time. And that does seem crazy. But we all know the technology is there. But I guess what this boils down to is money and funding to do this. Priority is often given to town locations because of density, the amount of people that will live there. Therefore, if you invest money in that denser town region, you will get more bang for your buck. if you invest it in my little village, Horton, where there's about 400 people, not so much bang for your buck. We don't even have street lamps, but I just pay the same council tax, Elizabeth. Ludicrous.
Start a campaign, Rich. You should find out who your local authority is. I'm sure.
I'm going to send out a petition. If everyone could sign it, please. Who's here?
Yeah, for us, just sort of on that last question, you break down obviously between mobile data and a fixed broadband connection there, and then you have two issues. One is the infrastructure and actually making sure that physically there's either pipes and wires in the ground or there's mobile signal in the area. It is actually still amazing just how many areas do not have the level of connectivity just physically that you might expect that they do. And we know of whole villages actually in rural locations, but not impossible to access, not absolutely sort of halfway up a mountain, that don't have any internet access. So actually, if you tried this minute to give kit away, there's no possible way of connecting to the internet in that location. So that's one big problem. The other big problem is the affordability and the fact that actually we think about services online as being free, but the internet isn't free. And there's a myriad of views around whether it should or should not be, but we have to accept that anything that is online only has a cost attached to it, whether that's a monthly broadband fee, whether it's a data fee. And a big part of what we are thinking about within our national delivery plan is how do we make that accessible to everyone? What is the answer to the affordability question? How can we guarantee in this country that those on the absolute lowest incomes have a means to be able to access the internet? And that's not just going somewhere, that's when, where, and how they need to. So once we figure out the answer to that, we will be sure to let everybody know. But it's important to keep having those conversations and to keep highlighting that actually this remains a big issue in this country, and both in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of the affordability.
Can I ask you a quick question on that, Elizabeth? So I go back, I sort of joked at the example of using Facebook Zeppelins for connectivity. But for instance, we use Facebook as an example. They've got a vested interest in making their platform available to as many people as possible. You know, the more people that are using it, the more money they make. How have conversations gone, or have you had conversations with the likes of those sorts of organizations to invest? Because to me, one of their objectives would be more people accessing it, and so it would seem a logical, at least be open to a conversation with organizations like yourselves to try and support. Because if we look at funding routes, you've obviously got the government, and we know that is massively lacking in funding through no fault of their own. And then my brain goes to sponsorship and corporates who may have pots of money available to help with CSR, corporate social responsibility, or other pots. Just sorry, turning this on you a bit, Elizabeth. Sorry.
That's fine. So this is a conversation we have very regularly. We do have a lot of sort of open conversations with lots of big and indeed smaller businesses as well. Evidently within ESG, so environment, social and governance, which is where these sorts of issues tend to sit, social support issues. It's a crowded marketplace. There's lots of people wanting lots of different types of support and lots of very different needs coming across for businesses. But on the other hand, we are growingly sort of starting to see that recognition, and it's sort of been a bit of a wave. So during the pandemic, there was a massive light shone on digital inclusion, and it feels like actually the public consciousness, and I would include corporates, I would include government in that, kind of moved on. There was almost this, well, that's been fixed now, feeling. Right. We've got more things to worry about. We've got the war in Ukraine. We've got the cost of living crisis. But we're just starting to see this come back as that realization, oh, no, it was not actually fixed during the pandemic. And we have actually just launched our industry forum. So where we've been talking a lot to the sector, where we've been talking a lot to government, local and national, actually starting to create that space where businesses can start to come together with their response to our national delivery plan and what that means. So we're definitely looking at it. Just to wrap this up, because I know we're over time, and I always try not to be over time, so apologies to everybody.
That was my fault. I asked her a question. That was my fault, not Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Rich, for all of your insights. I'm really sure that our attendees will have taken a lot of inspiration actually away from that conversation. If you are keen to do more, keen to know what you could do next, do jump on our website where you can join our community hub, which is a great forum to continue conversations, continue to ask questions, continue to find support. Do read our national delivery plan, and we will put a link in the chat momentarily where you can see more about the 6 missions that we have brought together, which we believe are crucial to end digital poverty in the UK once and for all by the end of the decade. And when you have done that, you can also make a pledge on our website around an action that you're going to take. A really small action, a really big action. We love to see all of those. So please do take a look at the links that Ellie is just posting in the chat now. Please do also remember the Digital Poverty Alliance, we are a charity. We can only do what we do thanks to the support of individuals and organisations. So if you like what you hear, think about how you could get involved and support us. Particularly if you are a corporate, we have lots of opportunities to either join our organisation or sponsor ongoing initiatives to make sure that no family is left offline by the end of the decade. Thank you so much, Rich, again. Really appreciated your time today, and I'm sure that we'll keep this conversation going.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I've just posted my Digital Lives newsletter in there. If anyone wants to follow that, subscribe to it. Next one will be coming out end of this week, early next week. But that's just stories about how we're all tied to tech across the Southeast.
I'm already subscribed, but if you're not, you should be.
Thank you.
See you all soon. Take care, everyone.